think that what we learned 2 decades or so ago was that the notions around climate change and what effect they may have on life on planet Earth was the purview largely of climate scientists throughout the world taking a look at this issue, trying to understand what it really meant. When it migrated, I think, into the public consciousness broadly, certainly in the United States, was when former Vice President Al Gore put out the film An Inconvenient Truth. And I think that what happened at that point in the United States, certainly here in Santa Cruz, was that it was a bit of a wake-up call that this isn't something a few scientists someplace are looking at. This is pretty well established by the scientific community. And what ensued at that time was a debate among scientists of various belief systems in the world about the degree to which it was true that human activity is changing the temperature of planet Earth, and if so, what are the causes of that, and if so, what is it that can or should be done about it. So I think that we saw a transformation from kind of the backwaters of public policy to the front of mind for consumers and people throughout the world. Oh my goodness, maybe there is something to all of this business around climate change. Maybe we should be paying attention to it. So I think in the last 10, 12 years, the question's been settled about whether it's a climate hoax or it's a real thing. I think that the vast bulk of the evidence now is all in favor of, yes, climate change is occurring. It is going to continue to take place. It is a direct result of the Industrial Revolution and the continuing and increasing pollution emitted into the air, largely into the air. But it also has very negative consequences on the ocean, which provides every other breath that you take is provided by Mother Ocean. It is having the effect of causing all kinds of changes in the chemistry of oceans, not just the chemistry of the atmosphere, but the chemistry of oceans. And so what we've got is a real existential threat to living on planet Earth as we know it. Planet Earth is going to go on. It's not about whether planet Earth goes on. Planet Earth's going to go on, and there will be life on planet Earth. The question becomes, is that livable for human beings? And if so, under what set of conditions? It seems like the science is saying the conditions under which life on Earth for human beings, that change is going to be very dramatic, very significant. Thomas Friedman, who writes for the New York Times, wrote a book, Hot, Flat, and Crowded, before this became a popular subject matter. It was a bit after Inconvenient Truth came out. It was very serious work, as Thomas Friedman does, very serious work of literature and journalism. And he explained how the issues associated with climate change are going to cause very significant population shifts in the world as we see that some areas become less habitable because they become hotter, drier, that you're going to see migrations of human beings in the world. We're already starting to see some of that happen. So I think that whether it's in the journalism space or the scientific space or the public policy making space, what has been settled now is the question of whether or not this is happening. Is it caused by humans, and is there anything we can do about it? Now I think we're faced, certainly myself as an elected official, faced with the following question. I'm the mayor of a relatively small city. We think it's the biggest city in Santa Cruz County, and that's true, but it's a city of 66,000 people, permanent residents. We get up to about 166,000 7 months of the year when tourists are here, but we're a city of about 66,000 people. So if we do something or don't do something, Some people are going to say, well, it doesn't make any difference. We're a city of 66,000. My view of that is that's a position everybody could take in the world. I'm just one individual, what can I do about this? Or I live in a small city or a small town, what can I do about this? And why should I change my life in my town, my family, my house, unless the rest of the world's going to change too? And that's not an irrational thought by people. But I think the right response to that is that if we're aware that this is a real human-caused climactic change, then we can, in fact, have a responsibility. I believe we have a responsibility then to do whatever it is we can while balancing other sets of equities as well. So what do we do, let's say, in the city of Santa Cruz? We say we're a very liberal community. We're not having heated debates about whether or not climate change is real or whether or not it's human caused. Primarily, that's a settled fact in the city of Santa Cruz. We have a University of California packed with brilliant scientists. This is a settled question as far as they're concerned as well. So what can we do about it? Well, I think that what we know worldwide is this. If we don't change the fuel type for transportation and change most of the fuel types for generating electricity worldwide, we will fail miserably and quickly. In the next decade or so, things are going to get much, much worse. If, however, we change the fuel type in transportation and change the fuel type in generating electricity, the world is likely to be able to, if you excuse the phrase, weather this. We will be able to get through this. If we can slow the warming down, stop the warming, allow the world to heal itself, then I think we're going to be fine as a species. If we don't make those two changes in fuel and electricity, then we can do everything else and we'll fail. We'll fail. So what can we do on changing the fuel on transportation, the fuel we use for electricity and other purposes? A couple of things. One is we can try to reduce the volume of greenhouse gases emitted in transportation. That will largely be a fuel change, going from certainly carbon-based fuels for transportation to electricity. The electricity conversion also has a range of, if you do what is called an upstream energy audit, if you said, let's take this electric car compared to this internal combustion engine car, and we look at both of them and we back them up through the chain of activities to produce that car, to manufacture that car. What does it got? It's not the case that an electric car is just vastly better than an internal combustion engine in terms of manufacturing that car. There are still all kinds of manufacturing environmental implications, greenhouse gas implications with both of them. However, even with that, when you then think about an electric vehicle, some of the questions become, well, where does the electricity come from for your electric vehicle? You're charging your electric vehicle. Where does that electricity come from? Is that from a coal-fired plant? Is that from hydroelectric? Is that from some other form of green energy? So these are linked together. So if we want to change the fuel type in transportation to go from carbon-based fuels for transportation to, let's say, electricity, we shouldn't believe that that has no consequences to it. But it is much better in terms of global climate change than an internal combustion engine. No debate about that, really. So how do we incent the conversion? As government, how do we do that? That's not going to happen at the city of Santa Cruz level or the county of Santa Cruz level, except for what I'm going to talk about in a minute. So these are changes that the state legislature and the governor, which have taken real serious action on this in the last decade, to say, for example, Governor Newsom's desire that there not be internal combustion engines available for, or vehicles available for sale in California after a certain date, which is coming up rather soon, within the next decade. That will still leave a lot of vehicles on the road that are internal combustion engines, but it is going to be a substantial change, and it gives consumers the time to think through for them in their individual circumstances how to make that change. The other issue around transportation, though, becomes, is it possible on a local level, where we don't have the authority to say we're going to have electric vehicles instead of internal combustion, except to the extent that we buy vehicles as local government. So there we should lead by example. We want to convert our fleet of city vehicles, whether they're police cars, whether they're public works vehicles, whether they're parks maintenance vehicles, whatever they have, whatever vehicles we have, convert those to essentially green energy vehicles. Because I think it annoys the heck out of people if government tells you to do something and then you look at the government and they're not doing it themselves. It drives people to distraction, as it should. So I think first on these where government is saying, we're looking for behavioral changes and we're going to be passing laws that incent certain kind of changes and disincent other kinds of activities, then we should do that as government ourselves. And not exempt ourselves or say, gee, it's too expensive for us, because that's what everybody else says. This is costly, this is hard, do I really have to do this? So what the city of Santa Cruz has done is said, we need to have literally a plan for this. This isn't something you just grab something from here and there and think about it once in a while. This is an issue which I think dominates or is overarching a whole range of issues. So climate change, I am willing to stipulate that climate change is an existential threat to human existence on planet Earth. And that if we don't make changes, our species is going to disappear. And so it is imperative that we make changes to keep planet Earth a habitable place for our species. In order to do that, at the local level, at the city of Santa Cruz level, I think the following kinds of things are important. Have a plan, and we have done that, a climate action plan in the city of Santa Cruz. And it says, here are the areas we think we can work on as a public agency, whether that is converting our fleet over to zero-emission vehicles, whether it is the public policies we make with regard to exceeding state standards on buildings with regard to their energy efficiency. Excuse me. We had an item before us in mid-November, and we will revisit it again at the end of November, and this has to do with how it is we would move away from natural gas piping into buildings that are new construction for purpose of heating air, heating water, the normal uses of natural gas, and convert that to electricity as the source of heating, water, warming your home, and so on. What we use natural gas to do, shift over to electric. Now, that is a substantial change, because natural gas is one of the great generators of greenhouse gas emissions. It is highly toxic in the sense of what it does in the environment relative to greenhouse gases and the warming of planet Earth. So moving away from natural gas and moving towards electricity in buildings is a major component part, I believe, of sustaining this conversion from carbon-based fuels to renewable fuels. and to fuels which have much less of an impact in terms of greenhouse gas. So we go from a very small, seemingly, change in the city's ordinances about new construction. This doesn't have to do with an existing home or a remodel or an addition on your business or whatever it might be. This is all about brand new construction. How much of it can we make electrical? How little of it needs to be natural gas? Well, if we set a standard on that, then it'll be electricity and it won't be natural gas. Now there's some activities. You build a new restaurant, obviously you're going to have natural gas in your restaurant for your purposes of your ovens and so on. That's going to be a longer transition, I suspect. But outside of some of these uses like that in the commercial space, in the residential and commercial space for purpose of heating water and heating space, air warming our buildings, the electricity option is the right option to take. And so the city will, and we're doing this between the middle of November and the end of October when we'll be taking a final action on this. I suspect the city council will adopt the ordinance with some changes in it at the end of November, which will say that in the city of Santa Cruz, new construction needs to, for all intents and purposes, be natural gas free. And it's going to be electricity which is going to do this, with some exceptions, like I say, that are going to lag behind. Between that and a range of other activities we're engaged in, I think we have a fighting chance to do our part. And I think that, I understand it if somebody would say, again, we're a very small city, what can we do collectively, what could I do individually, is that going to make any difference? Well, since we're contributing to the problem, all 66,000 of us, whether we're in our cars or we're heating our house with natural gas or whatever it may be, we're all contributing. So we can all contribute to solving the problem as well. And I think we're seeing individual consumer choices in that regard that are not mandated by government necessarily. We see people voluntarily purchasing electric vehicles. We see people voluntarily adding insulation to their home. We see people voluntarily converting from natural gas to electricity in their appliances. We see people doing this voluntarily. So the consumer is not unaware of this. I think for many people the question becomes, what's the cost here? Because I don't have unlimited, I'm a regular resident of the city of Santa Cruz. It's the most expensive place in terms of the difference between what it costs to rent and what people are paid. It's the most expensive rental market in the United States. Some people say, well, it can't be true. It's got to be Manhattan, it's got to be more. If you want to rent a place in Beverly Hills, don't tell me it's less expensive than Santa Cruz. The way this metric is constructed, it is, what is the median income? What is the median price to rent an apartment or a home? That disparity is greater in Santa Cruz than any place in the United States. So when people say, I'm concerned about the cost, that's not a flippant comment by them. That's a very real concern. If they're able to live here, they pay a really high amount of money to live here. It's a very expensive place to be. And no matter how good the cause is, if you say, gee, let's have you spend more money, people I think at least are, I'd like to do that, I'm not sure I have that money to spend. So finding this balance point where we can lead as government by doing the right thing ourselves, by putting ordinances in place that are prospective, that don't ask people to go back and change what's in their house right now, unless they voluntarily want to change their appliances and that kind of thing. That the way to get the most participation in that, I think, is to make it prospective. And that's what the council's doing, is saying new construction in Santa Cruz is going to need to be environmentally sound with regard to how you heat water, how you heat the space. We're going to emphasize electricity. We're going to do as much as possible to literally prohibit natural gas. Now, people might say, well, okay, that sounds fine. I'm not in the building business, you know, it doesn't affect me or my house or my apartment that I live in right now. That sounds pretty good. I'll do these other things also, you know, I'll do all the things I can do as a consumer. But is that really going to change anything? Well, I think what we know right now in the city of Santa Cruz is that between January 1st of 2024 and January 1st of 2032, we're going to have an 8-year period where there will be something on the order of 3,700 new housing units in the city of Santa Cruz. For those who say, I don't want that, I'd rather it be like it's always been in Santa Cruz, where we manage our growth and we're not overwhelmed by the Silicon Valley, and we're not overwhelmed by the failure of the University of California to build on-campus housing. I want to be able to say no to things. That takes us to our next point that I think is quite important. The state of California has decided, and they made this decision about 5 years ago, that there simply has not been enough housing built in the state of California to be able to accommodate the needs of our population. What does that mean? Do we mean there's no, people don't have a place to live? Is that our cause of homelessness? Is that why people aren't housed? It includes those issues, but it's also an issue of overcrowding, 2 or 3 families living in either a home or an apartment not designed for that. It also has to do with when you limit the supply, obviously the pricing of the product goes up. We know that to be the case in Santa Cruz. So what are we going to do when the state has now said, you, the city of Santa Cruz, have to show how 3,700 plus units of new housing will be built in the city of Santa Cruz in the next 8 years. Government doesn't build housing. We're not going to be building housing. This is that we have to show the state of California how we have knocked down every barrier that they see to housing, and they say yes to how we're going to do that. If they don't say yes to that, if they say no to how we're planning on doing it, they will come in and do it themselves without any consideration for our local community. And the state has spent the last 5 years doing exactly that. Let me give you one example of a bill. There are over 100 new laws in the state of California in the last 5 years to promote the development of housing. I'll give you one example. It is no longer legal in the state of California if a developer wants to develop an apartment building of 30 or more units relatively close to a transit stop. The local government cannot require any parking. Any parking. Now you might say, that's insane. That makes absolutely no sense. That doesn't mean there won't be any parking. It means the city can't require it. That means we've privatized the decision on how much parking there will be to the developer. Now, the public policy goal there is to reduce cost, to incent people to use public transit or bicycles or some other way. That's an interesting social engineering experiment. It's going to be fascinating to see how it works out. But how I tie this back into climate change is, if there are going to be 3,700 new units of housing developed, keep in mind that's not individuals, that's at least twice that number of individuals. Because these are going to be 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, some are going to be studios, some are going to be 3-bedroom houses for people to buy, some are going to be this, some are going to be that. But it's going to be way over 3,700 individuals. The reason I bring this up is that where we do this is directly associated with climate change. If you say, okay, what we'll do is we'll spread that 3,700 units all over the city of Santa Cruz. from my point of view, that's bad public policy on climate change. It's also bad public policy because it's going to attack neighborhoods. The right thing to do, I think, is what smart communities do. You increase your density in your existing urban area. We have a small one. We call it downtown Santa Cruz. That's our small urban area. Greater density, greater heights in buildings than you find anywhere else in the city. Anywhere else in the city. I think smart growth says you concentrate your new growth as much as possible into your existing urban area. Make it more dense, make it a bit taller. Not 15-story buildings, 20-story buildings, none of that. I don't support any of that. But the state of California is not giving us a choice about whether or not we grow. The only choice we have is where do we grow in our city. So if you want to preserve neighborhoods, if you want to keep incenting people to use public transportation, to walk, to use their bicycle, why not say in that area where we also have a lot of jobs, especially in the service industry, why not create a lot of apartments in that same area so that now what you're doing is you're reducing miles traveled, you're reducing the carbon footprint in that area. The building itself is going to be much more environmentally sound because of all the energy saving requirements and so on. So I think between what the government does, in this case the city of Santa Cruz, adopt a climate action plan, make sure the city is leading by example, make sure that what we're doing can be achievable by those that we are directing to do that, which in this case happens to be the community that builds housing. I know that calling someone a developer in Santa Cruz is about as nasty a thing as you can call them. But the other side of that coin is everybody lives someplace that was built by a developer. So when they were moving into their house or moving into their apartment, somehow a developer was okay, but if a developer is building it for somebody else, it's not an okay thing, but that's just the dynamic we live in. I understand that. The word developer is a substitute for the concept of we don't really want to grow very much in Santa Cruz. That's an ethic we've been able to hold on to for a long time. That's no longer our option. Our only option is, do you grow out? Do you want to go onto the north edge of the city and start talking about annexing towards Davenport? We already had that conversation. That was in the 1960s and 70s in Santa Cruz when there was a proposal to build a 30,000 home community between the western edge of Santa Cruz and Davenport, and to also have a nuclear power plant for which PG&E had already made the application to the California Public Utilities Commission. There have been grand schemes over the years for massive expansion of the city of Santa Cruz. And the voters have said, no, no, no. That's why in the few decades ago they adopted the Green Belt Initiative to put a green belt around the city of Santa Cruz, saying we are not going to make the city any bigger by expanding the city. Well, now comes along the state of California and says, well, good for you, but we are going to see you grow. That is a legal requirement, not an option, not a good idea, not a happy thought, not a whatever. This is the law. And if we don't decide where we're going to grow, then the state will come in and approve what is called the builder's remedy, in which case they get to do what they want, where they want. The alternative to that is to say, we know how we're going to do this. We will show you how we can do this in a climate change way, in a way that is very aware of climate change. Every mile of commuting we reduce is a point for us not continuing to pollute the environment and add to greenhouse gases. Every time somebody moves into an apartment in downtown Santa Cruz and works within a half a mile of that, we're taking a commuter off the road. We're stopping that person is no longer turning the ignition on their internal combustion engine to drive to work. So there are everything from the piping into new construction to the city leading by example and being a good citizen itself, to how do we develop going into the future. Those are all going to be component parts to it to answer the question, what can we do? Now I think there's another area in transportation that's worth some amount of thought here, and that is the public transit component. So in Santa Cruz County, we have the Santa Cruz Metropolitan Transit District. And that district basically runs our buses and our lift line service and paratransit and all of that. But what most people think are the big buses. So those have two pieces that get implicated in climate change as I see it. One is, what is the fuel type the buses use? And the good news is that the transit district is going to be moving to a place very quickly in the next few months where they're going to receive, I think it's almost 36 new hydrogen-fueled buses, which are as clean as you can get because all that emits is water vapor. That's all this hydrogen vehicle emits. So it is a tremendous leap forward by the transit district, which has dozens of buses running thousands of miles every single day. Converting those over to clean fuel vehicles, really clean fuel vehicles, is a major step, I think, for our community. Secondly comes the question, and this is the great debate around the county of Santa Cruz, sort of, and that is, once the Regional Transportation Commission, which is a different body than the Metropolitan Transit District basically owns and operates the bus system. The Regional Transportation Commission is largely a planning body. What should we be doing with highways and roads and rail and all that from a planning perspective? But they got into the transit business a few years ago because they now own the 32-mile rail line from Davenport to Watsonville. And of course we know that we've had at least 2 elections on this question. Should we try to have both a rail line that serves people via some kind of vehicle on the rails and a trail next to it, or should we just have a trail because the rail's infeasible? So that question has been debated, discussed, and litigated in elections, and every time the voters of Santa Cruz County have been asked, they say, until it's abundantly clear to us that it's not possible, we want you to put one foot in front of the other and do both. We want to see a trail along the rail line, and we want you to continue to put one foot in front of the other, planning for something on that rail line that will be clean and efficient between at least Santa Cruz and Watsonville, and serving Cabrillo College, serving Mid-County, moving people who live one place and work another, because putting 3,700 housing units isn't going to solve all the commuting problems inside the city of Santa Cruz. But we do know factually that a number of people who live in Watsonville work in North County. We know that. That's not a guess. We know that to be true. So 2 things make sense. Can we create an environment where more people live closer to where they work? That's this issue around increasing density in our urban core. And the other one is, for those that do commute, or that still is what they choose, I want to live in Watsonville, my community, my culture, my family, what I love is, I love Watsonville, but my work is over here. For those folks, can we create as pollution-free an alternative as possible? That's what the Regional Transportation Commission is trying to figure out right now. Is there a financially feasible way to have zero-emission vehicles on the rail line? Is that 2 or 3 electric vehicles connected to each other and trained behind each other, is that, what is this? I don't know. I'm not a transit or transportation expert or anything close to it. That's what they're studying right now, is what's possible. I think what the community wants in that regard is it wants a yes at the end of the study. It must be possible, given the trillions of dollars being invested right now worldwide in rail. If we look at what is the single area of transportation that is, where's the greatest investment right now, new investment in transit and transportation, worldwide, it's in rail. That's where it's happening. The energy that it takes to move an entire train is very small compared to ships, compared to trucks, compared to all kinds of other ways to move. So we know that rail is very efficient, very positive in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And if we change the fuel type in that engine on the train, and that becomes a zero emission vehicle, then rail even becomes more, from an environmental point of view, even more favorably viewed. The question becomes, where is the money to do that? And I do think that what will happen on this is that at some point within the next decade, that question is going to be put to the voters. I think there will be a desire to pull down state and federal money, of which President Biden's Infrastructure Act provided an enormous amount of funds in that regard. Governor Newsom is very committed to that, as well as his legislature. We've been talking here for three-quarters of an hour about climate change and its challenges worldwide, but what can we do about it here locally? What is it we can do? And I think that our community is well positioned to do meaningful things on climate change. First of all, because we're not having some robust debate around here about whether or not this is a real thing or it's human caused. It's a real thing, it's human caused, we need to do many things about it. That's a settled question in Santa Cruz. So there's a lot of political support for actually doing something. And I think that as we've talked about today, falls into a couple of big categories. What can government do by leading by example and harnessing the tax dollars that people already spend into those activities that they already pay, put those into those activities which will have measurable impact on reducing greenhouse gases in our community. And largely that will be around transit, transportation, and building. Those are the three areas we will get the largest gain in our community. So that will become issues around natural gas and new construction, the government converting its fleet from internal combustion engines to clean fuel vehicles, not only in the small context of things like the city's police department, public works, parks, and those kinds of vehicles, but also the public agency like our Metropolitan Transit District receiving new buses that are hydrogen fueled. Looking out a few years, the questions around what kind of rail can we have in the city of Santa Cruz to the city of Watsonville and points in between on the 32-mile rail line that the public agency, the Regional Transportation Commission, purchased. I want to say this because on that point, if I could. Think for a moment if there was no rail line. There had never been a rail line, and you said to yourself, my goodness, is there something we could do other than continuing to widen Highway 1? And you said to yourself, you know, let's do this. Let's see if we could put a 32-mile rail line in between Davenport and Watsonville. you would be laughed out of wherever it was you said that. Because if there was no rail line at the time and you wanted to do that, you'd be talking about billions of dollars worth of property that would have to be condemned, purchased, removed, and put in a rail line. We got the existing rail line for $30 million. Less than $1 million a mile. We bought that real estate from Southern Pacific and put it into the public domain. We got a bargain that any community would be extremely jealous to get a 32-mile transit corridor in their community by paying $30 million for it. So we have a gift here, and we need to be stewarding that gift very, very well for trail and for rail as I see it. So, big conclusion. We are a very aware community about climate change. I detect a very strong desire on the part of the electorate to do individually what they can do and have their government do what it can do, both in the present moment and in planning for the future, whether that is land use planning, transit planning, transportation planning. All of those go into that picture. And I think we're going to be quite successful with that. In the city of Santa Cruz, we are going to have a couple of issues which are rushing our way. There's going to be a ballot measure in March on the city election ballot, which will raise the question of whether we should try to not develop very much in our downtown. I think that that's a very bad idea because it runs contrary to every smart growth principle that's been around for the last 20 years of increasing density in urban areas, reducing vehicle miles traveled for commuting, all kinds of issues. That's one opportunity for voters to decide where should this growth happen inside our city, not whether or not it happens. The state's taken that away from us, whether or not we grow. The only question is, where do we grow? And I think the voters are going to be presented with the question of, do we grow downtown mostly, or do we spread our growth all over the city? I think most voters are going to say, if we don't have a choice about growing, then let's grow mostly in our downtown and protect my neighborhood against a lot of new growth and development. Secondly, with regard to votes, I think that we will see on the ballot, the statewide ballot, the governor and the legislature are putting a couple of measures on there which will go to the question of climate change, bond measures to engage in activities which will reduce greenhouse gases. They are also going to have a bond measure which is very likely to be on the ballot, which would provide money for affordable housing. There actually is a link between affordable housing and greenhouse gas emissions. What we know the following to be true. This is not true of every case, but as income goes up, commuting goes down. Lower the income, the longer the commute, generally speaking. Not true in every part of every community, but in California, that's generally true. So the degree to which we develop so that jobs and housing are closer together, and for those instances where jobs and housing are separated, to have good, efficient, clean public transportation. Those two go together. So voters are going to have some choices both on the local ballot and the statewide ballot in March and November of 2024 to weigh in on that.